An attempt by God to give them like willful ignorance. Yeah, they had free will. Free will to do what? They don't know. They're no better than them beasts, right? Just like the cat doesn't know it's doing the right or wrong thing. But that finding out that knowledge is so detrimental. It seems odd to me. It seems weird. And also, just to throw something in, that God said if they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that they would die as a result of it. And the snake said, no way, you'll just get to know all the things that he does. And one of them was a liar, and it wasn't the snake.
Hey everyone. If you clicked on this, you already know we're diving into something intense today. Sean Stevenson, an atheist philosopher, sits down across from Nathan Elvidge, a Christian philosopher from Oxford, to debate whether God is necessary for morality or whether believing in divine command actually makes moral atrocities easier to justify. What starts as a philosophical discussion about objective right and wrong turns into something far more personal when Sean brings up Alan Turing's chemical castration under Christian moral law, then delivers a complete reversal of Dostoevsky's famous "without God, all things are permissible" argument, and finally lands a blow to the Garden of Eden story that I genuinely did not see coming. The pacing on this builds deliberately. Stick with it through to the final third, because that's where the most surgical line in the entire debate drops. Before we jump in, drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're tuning in from. I love seeing how far these conversations reach. All right, let's get into it.
Some things which we might say were evil would be, probably quite good, like it would be evil for you to... Okay, now I'm going to have to think of an example, but there are examples.
Yeah,
but
well, you can come back to it.
there would be some things that would be absolutely abhorrent in the past that now seem perfectly acceptable. I mean, a simple example would be homosexuality. So homosexuality was, absolutely diabolical. Not even that long ago in our history, in the UK, it was something that you would be imprisoned for, or worse, castrated, as we did with figures like Alan Turing. But now we see it very differently. If we had stuck with the idea it was evil, where can we go from there? An absolute evil? No way. No, we have to be open and willing to change. I think you'd agree with me on that, at least.
Well, we'll find out. You're watching Unbelievable with me, host Andy Kine. We're at Wodston School, and my guests are Sean Stevenson and Nathan Elvidge. We've been talking about the question of, is there a God? We've been looking at morality, and not so much the problem of evil, but the question of the definition of evil. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with questions from the students here, so stay tuned.
Pretty much universally, social science suggests that many of the institutions that we hold dear, that shape us, that provide us social support, a huge amount of this used to happen anyway inside of these traditional religious structures, and there really has been nothing to replace it.
It's amazing how quickly ostensible deontologists transform before our very eyes into utilitarians on this question. We're talking about what the self is here. I mean, atheists believe in the self. Everybody believes in the self.
Well, no, that's not. I mean, that I find difficult to believe. Why would an atheist believe in the self? The self is a series of non-deciding mechanisms. The arguments against God are fairly compelling, and I think the arguments against atheism are fairly compelling. The difference is that most people who believe in God have expressed doubts, and a lot of people who are atheists tend to be more religious in this way than many of the people who are God believers.
If people listening agree with me that free will in fact doesn't exist, and simultaneously agree with you that free will is somehow necessary for the upkeep of civilization, then I would simply ask them to consider who's relying on the delusion here. This show does seem to have an extraordinary capacity for putting me face to face with people that I've been talking smack about online, so thanks again.
Welcome back to part two of this Unbelievable show with me, your host Andy Kind, and my guests Sean Stevenson and Nathan Elvidge. We've been inundated with thousands of questions. It's like Countdown, really, the numbers game. So we're going to get through as many as we can. It's a bit of a quick fire thing. We won't do this one, which is, are aliens green? Absolutely nothing to do with the debate whatsoever. One over here. Are aliens real? No, we won't do that one either. There's no questions here that aren't about aliens. Here we are, one for you, Sean. Sorry to start with you. Do you want the aliens one in?
Yeah. No,
okay. Is evil subjective without God? That's sort of been what we've been talking about, but if there is no God, quickly, to sum up, is evil just subjective?
I would say we experience it subjectively, and it would be difficult to say that it's subjective in terms of being absolute. But I think there are some things we can absolutely say, based on the things I said before, the effect that it has on people. There are some things that we want to avoid, some things that we want to develop more of. And it's just having the proper rational or reasonable focus on what they should be. That's what should lead us and guide us.
Nathan, one for you. What do you think is the biggest misconception about God?
Oh, that's a big question.
It is a big question.
Again, I would just restate what I said at the beginning, that people have this idea that there are no reasons for believing in God, that it's just this irrational superstition. If you look at what's actually going on in the professional philosophy debates on this, that's a grotesque mischaracterization.
Great. We'll stay with you, Nathan. These are fantastic. When I was at school, we wouldn't have been able to come up with any questions like this at all.
This is where Sean goes for the throat. And he does it in a way that Nathan cannot dismiss, because it is not abstract philosophy. It is documented historical harm caused by Christian moral absolutism. Sean brings up homosexuality. He said this: a simple example would be homosexuality. So homosexuality was, absolutely diabolical. Not even that long ago in our history in the UK. Not ancient history. Not some Old Testament story that Christians can explain away with context. Recent history, living memory, and then he names a specific victim that everyone knows. Sean said this: it was something that you would be imprisoned for, or worse, castrated as we did with, figures like Alan Turing. Alan Turing, one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. The man who helped crack the Enigma code and potentially shortened World War II by years. And Christianity's absolute moral law led to him being chemically castrated for being gay. That is not a theoretical problem. That is a real human being whose life was destroyed by the very moral framework Nathan is defending. And Sean does not stop there. He delivers the philosophical point that makes this argument complete. He said this: if we had stuck with the idea it was evil, where can we go from there? An absolute evil? No way. We have to be open and willing to change. That is the difference. Secular morality can learn. It can recognize when it was wrong and correct itself. But if you claim something is an absolute moral law handed down by God, how do you ever admit you were wrong? You are stuck defending the indefensible because changing your position means admitting God was wrong, or that you misunderstood God, or that the moral law was never absolute in the first place. And Nathan has no response to this. None. He does not defend Christianity's historical position on homosexuality. He does not explain how an absolute moral law can change. He just lets it sit there. The debate moves into a Q&A section with students asking questions. One student asks Sean directly, "Is evil subjective without God?" And Sean gives an answer that I think is worth paying attention to because it shows how you can have moral clarity without needing divine command. He said this: there are some things that we want to avoid, some things that we want to develop more of. And it's just having the proper, rational, or reasonable focus on what they should be. It is not about divine revelation. It is about observing the world, seeing what causes suffering and what reduces it, seeing what empowers people to flourish and what diminishes them. That is a foundation for morality that does not require believing in supernatural claims that cannot be verified.
Question for you, Nathan. The omnipotence paradox. Do you think God is capable of creating a puzzle that he himself couldn't solve?
Short answer, no.
Okay. Oh, and you're not going to give a long answer. Fine.
One line answer, God can do whatever is possible. The idea of a puzzle God can't solve is an impossible object. It doesn't refer to any real thing, so God can't do it.
Okay, great. In the same way you couldn't make a square circle.
Yes.
Okay. Sean, one for you. The question is, how big is the debate? But I think what that really means is, why is this an important question? We've got two people, very clever, very well read and researched, but both disagreeing. So why is this an important question for you, Sean?
I think it's important because we need to have a really honest answer as to what role we should be giving God in our lives. There's this saying by Dostoevsky, he's a Russian writer a long time ago. He said, without God, all things are permissible, which means that if you don't have God in your life, you could just do whatever you want and there are no consequences. Well, actually, I think that with God, all things are permissible. Because when you have a divine authority that you can just vouch for, say, well, God said this, God sanctions this, then you can do whatever you like. And with impunity, because you're not the one to be held accountable, God is. And who could put God on trial in that way? It's a dangerous thing to have ruling and governing the way you behave in the world, I think. Or it can be, not always.
Can I just come in?
Of course you can.
Yeah. I agree that in many ways God is a really dangerous idea, but some dangerous ideas are true and they're worth believing precisely for that reason.
One for you, Nathan. We've talked about the idea of absolute evil. Putting you in the dock now, though, does absolute good exist?
Well, yes, God is absolute good.
Okay. Thanks for keeping your answers so short. Yeah, give him all the easy ones. All right, Sean, what about you? What are you doing this weekend?
Chilling out.
I should say. Yeah, well done. They love him. The crowd love him. I should maybe point out that that wasn't my attempt at flirting. I want you to know. I've got my own plans. Okay, Nathan. How do we know? Is it broadening out the question? How do we know which God of the many gods is the right God?
Good question. So this kind of philosophical debate is only going to get you so far here. You know, it gets you some of the way, right? In order for God to be the lawgiver of all morality, he has to be a perfectly good God, right? Not all religious traditions believe in a perfectly good God. Christianity is one of the ones that does. Maybe there are some others, maybe Islam, say, this stuff isn't going to adjudicate between Christianity and Islam. For that, you need to really get into issues of evidence, historical evidence for the resurrection, particular miracle reports, things on that kind of level.
Yeah. And of course, we at Unbelievable have so many hundreds of shows on different topics that people can watch and listen to. We're not trying to solve everything in this particular conversation.
A student asked Nathan the omnipotence paradox. The classic question, the omnipotence paradox: do you think God is capable of creating a puzzle that he himself could not solve? Nathan gives a one-line answer. He said this: God can do whatever is possible. The idea of a puzzle God cannot solve is an impossible object. That is a standard response. God is not bound by logical contradictions because logical contradictions do not refer to anything real. You cannot make a square circle. You cannot create a rock so heavy that an omnipotent being cannot lift it. These are just word games that do not point to actual limitations, but then the conversation shifts to a much more important question. A student asks Sean why this debate matters. And Sean sets up what I think is one of the most devastating philosophical reversals in this entire conversation. Sean references Dostoevsky. He said this. He said, without God, all things are permissible, which means that if you don't have God in your life, You could just do whatever you want and there are no consequences. That is one of the most famous arguments for why God is necessary for morality. If there is no divine lawgiver, then morality becomes arbitrary. You can do whatever you want. There is no ultimate accountability. Christians use this argument constantly to argue that atheism leads to moral chaos. And then Sean flips it. He said this, well, actually, I think that with God, all things are permissible, because when you have a divine authority that you can just vouch for, say, well, God said this, God sanctions this, then you can do whatever you like. Do you see what he just did? He took Christianity's most powerful moral argument and reversed it completely. With God, you can justify anything. Slavery, God permitted it in the Old Testament. Genocide, God commanded it against the Canaanites. Crusades, God wills it. Inquisitions, heresy must be purged. You have an unquestionable authority that you can invoke to justify whatever you want to do. And who can challenge you? You are just following God's commands. And Sean finishes the point. Then you can do whatever you like. And with impunity, because you are not the one to be held accountable, God is. And who could put God on trial in that way? It is a dangerous thing to have ruling and governing the way you behave in the world. That is a complete inversion of the Dostoevsky argument. And Nathan's response is telling. He said this, I agree that in many ways God is a really dangerous idea, but some dangerous ideas are true. That is a massive concession. Nathan just agreed that belief in God is dangerous. He is no longer arguing that God provides a stable moral foundation. He is arguing that even though God is dangerous, we should believe in him anyway because the idea might be true. That is a completely different argument, and it concedes the entire point Sean was making about moral accountability.
I'll bring this one to you, Sean. Surely, and I think you'll probably agree with it to a degree. I'm trying to help you out here.
Thanks.
Surely, if God created everything, then he created sin and suffering, or at least he made humans with the ability to create sin. I mean, that's from the atheist perspective, that's a pretty decent argument, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as an atheist, my understanding of God creating things isn't the same as a Christian. Mm-hmm. But the notion that people can sin as something that's inherent in them, there's a lot of talk about how that's important for free will and things like this. So one could say that God, if you were to believe that he created humanity, gave them the capacity to sin. But that's a really tough one, because the actual knowledge of what is good and what is evil isn't determined until they've already committed the first act of sin, right? So Adam and Eve chilling out in the garden, one of them goes, well, hey, snake over here says go and eat this apple, eats the fruit, and then they come to realize, well, hold on a minute, we're not wearing any clothes, what are we doing? This is wrong and that is wrong and all these other things that seem to be problematic. And that then is the realization that there are goods and evils, but only after the fact. And so there is kind of implied in that story an attempt by God to give them like willful ignorance. Yeah, they had free will. Free will to do what? They don't know. They're no better than beasts, right? Just like the cat doesn't know it's doing the right or wrong thing. But that finding out that knowledge is so detrimental. It seems odd to me. It seems weird. And also, just to throw something in, that God said if they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that they would die as a result of it. And the snake said, no way, you'll just get to know all the things that he does. And one of them was a liar, and it wasn't the snake.
Wow. I'll let you come. It's important to come back on that one, Nathan, I think.
On why does God create people with the ability to sin?
Yeah, I mean, is it not just a bit of a bad plan if you hate evil so much to allow humans so much freedom to commit evil?
I guess in my view, if you didn't have the ability and the freedom to commit evil, then none of your actions would be really weighty. When you are good, that wouldn't be in any way sort of valuable or praiseworthy. You would just be doing what you were sort of forced to do. So I think, yeah, God has to, in some sense, create or beings that can sin, that can fall, in order to have, triumph over evil, in order to have bravery and heroism. These things, in my mind, are what make our lives so valuable, what make them so distinctively human.
Fantastic.
Another student asks a question that gets at the foundation of Christian theology. The question is, surely if God created everything, then he created sin and suffering. This is the problem of evil, framed as a logical question about creation. If God created everything and God is good, why does evil exist? And Sean takes this question and uses it to expose a logical contradiction in the Garden of Eden story that I have never heard articulated quite this clearly before. Sean walks through the Genesis narrative. He said this: Adam and Eve chilling out in the garden. One of them goes, well, hey, Snake over here says, go and eat this apple, eats the fruit. And then they come to realize, well, hold on a minute, we're not wearing any clothes. And then he delivers the paradox. He said this: they had free will. Free will to do what? They don't know. That is the problem. Adam and Eve did not have knowledge of good and evil until after they ate the fruit. So how could they be morally responsible for the decision to eat it? They did not know it was wrong. They could not know it was wrong, because the knowledge of good and evil is what they gained by eating the fruit. Christians argue that the fall of humanity happened because Adam and Eve chose to disobey God. But if they did not have knowledge of good and evil before they ate the fruit, then they did not have the moral framework necessary to understand that disobedience was wrong. They were like children who have not developed a sense of right and wrong yet. And we do not hold children morally responsible for actions they do not understand are wrong. And then Sean delivers what I think is the single sharpest line in this entire debate. He said this: God said if they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that they would die as a result of it. And the snake said, no way, you'll just get to know all the things that he does. And one of them was a liar, and it wasn't the snake. That is devastating, because it is true. God said they would die. The snake said they would gain knowledge. They did not die. They gained knowledge. The snake told the truth. God did not. And the entire foundation of Christian theology about the fall of man and original sin rests on this story. Nathan tries to respond at the end by arguing that God had to create beings capable of sin so that goodness would be meaningful. He said this: if you didn't have the ability and the freedom to commit evil, then none of your actions would be really weighty. But that does not address the paradox Sean raised. It does not explain how beings without knowledge of good and evil could be morally responsible for their choice. It does not explain why God lied about the consequences. It just shifts to a different argument about the value of free will. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.